Bhumibol Adulyadej, the People's King of Thailand. Part 1, An Auspicious Birth and the Seeds of Destiny, 1927-1933. Bhumibol Adulyadej, destined to become the longest reigning monarch in Thai history and one of the most revered figures in modern Asia, was born on December 5, 1927, far from the sun-drenched temples and royal palaces of Bangkok. His birthplace was the modest Cambridge Hospital, now Mount Auburn Hospital, in the academic heart of Cambridge, Massachusetts, United States. His father, Prince Mahidol Adulyadej of Songkhla, was pursuing a degree in public health at Harvard University, while his mother, Mam Sengwan, later known as Princess Srinagarindra, the Princess Mother, was his companion and a source of profound strength throughout their family's journey. In a remarkable twist of fate, this newborn child, delivered in a foreign land to a prince studying medicine, would one day become the moral compass and enduring monarch of Thailand. At birth, the infant prince was temporarily recorded on his birth certificate as Baby Songkhla, a placeholder awaiting a proper, auspicious name to be chosen by the head of the House of Chakri, King Prajadipak, Rama VII, Bhumibol's paternal uncle. The king later bestowed upon him a name derived from ancient Sanskrit, Bhumibol Adulyadej, which translates poetically as strength of the land, incomparable power. Each element of his name symbolized the hopes of a nation and the weight of royal lineage. Bhumi meaning earth or land, Bala denoting strength, Atulya signifying incomparable, and Tej connoting splendor or power. Even as a newborn, the prince bore a name that foreshadowed a monumental life ahead. The young Bhumibol had two siblings who would also shape the royal family's trajectory. His older sister, Princess Galyani Vadana, and his brother, Prince Ananda Mahidol, who would later ascend the throne as King Rama IX, shared a close-knit bond that endured across decades and continents. The family's early years were defined by a mix of privilege, tragedy, and an earnest pursuit of knowledge. But this royal family was not cocooned in luxury. Instead, they often lived modestly, especially while abroad. Prince Mahidol, a modernist and reformist by nature, was known for his humility and dedication to service, traits that left a deep imprint on his youngest son. In 1928, not long after Bhumibol's first birthday, the family made their way back to Thailand. However, their time in the homeland was destined to be short-lived. In September 1929, tragedy struck the family when Prince Mahidol passed away from kidney failure at the age of just 37. The loss left the family reeling, especially as Bhumibol was barely 2 years old and would grow up with only distant memories of his father. Despite his short life, Prince Mahidol's legacy, his commitment to education, public service, and modern medicine, would echo in Bhumibol's life for decades to come. In the early 1930s, as the political climate in Thailand began to shift dramatically, Bhumibol's mother made a difficult decision that would profoundly shape her children's futures. In the aftermath of the 1932 Siamese Revolution, which marked the end of absolute monarchy and ushered in constitutional governance, Mam Sengwan took her children to Switzerland, seeking peace, stability, and education in a country known for neutrality and tranquility. Thus began the formative European chapter of Bhumibol's life. In Switzerland, the family settled in Lausanne, a picturesque town nestled along the northern shore of Lake Geneva. There, young Bhumibol enrolled at the École Nouvelle de la Suisse Romande, a progressive school known for fostering creativity and intellectual curiosity. While his royal heritage remained a part of his identity, the Lausanne years were marked by a relatively normal childhood. He played in the snow, explored the lush countryside, and made friends in an environment that valued personal merit over royal lineage. It was in Switzerland that Bhumibol developed one of his earliest and longest-lasting passions, photography. In 1934, he received his first camera, a gift that sparked a fascination with visual storytelling and observation. This hobby would remain with him throughout his life, and countless candid photographs, many taken by the king himself, would document not just the royal family's private moments, but also the quiet dignity of the Thai people in distant rural corners of the kingdom. Although a prince by birth and younger brother to a king-to-be, Bhumibol's early years were defined less by grandeur and more by simplicity, intellectual curiosity, and a growing awareness of the burdens that would one day rest on his shoulders. His mother, an unassuming woman of common birth, who later became one of the most respected figures in modern Thai history, instilled in her children the values of compassion, humility, and service. Far from the intrigues of palace life in Bangkok, this modest upbringing gave Bhumibol the foundation for the profoundly spiritual and people-focused kingship he would later embody. But even as he matured in Switzerland, the call of his homeland never fully receded. Thailand, now entering a turbulent new era of political change, would soon summon him back, not just as a royal by blood, but as a monarch destined to preside over one of the most transformative reigns in the nation's history. Part 2, Shadows of the Crown, Youth Tragedy and the Path to the Throne, 1933-1946. In the peaceful valleys of Switzerland, far from the political upheavals of Southeast Asia, the young Prince Bhumibol Adulyadej was growing into a thoughtful and introspective youth. Though the Swiss Alps surrounded him with natural beauty, he was never truly free from the expectations of royalty. The distant call of duty lingered in the background, even as he pursued a relatively ordinary upbringing alongside his mother, sister, and older brother, Prince Ananda Mahidol. After relocating to Lausanne in 1933, following the constitutional revolution in Thailand that reduced the power of the monarchy, the family focused on their education and private life. In this serene environment, Bhumibol showed an early aptitude for a wide range of interests. At the École Nouvelle de la Suisse Romande and later the prestigious Gymnase Classique Cantonal de Lausanne, he excelled in academics, particularly in French literature, Latin, and Greek. In these early academic pursuits, the young prince developed a disciplined intellect and a love of the arts that would shape his future reign. Though always somewhat reserved, Bhumibol's inner world was vibrant. At home, he nurtured a fascination with gadgets, machines, and cameras, objects that allowed him to observe and interact with the world in personal and creative ways. His first camera, received at age 7, became more than a toy. It was a window into the way he viewed his surroundings. Through photography, he documented moments of intimacy, dignity, and beauty. He also enjoyed drawing and would later become a proficient painter and sketch artist, known for his attention to detail and emotional depth. Music, however, emerged as his greatest passion. In 1942, as World War II raged across Europe and Asia, Bhumibol, then a teenager, discovered jazz. The saxophone became his instrument of choice, and he began to immerse himself in the rhythms and improvisational beauty of American jazz. Influenced by the likes of Sidney Bechet and Benny Carter, Bhumibol practiced rigorously, often performing for family and friends. Jazz provided him with a means of self-expression that stood in contrast to the strict codes of royal life. It was free, dynamic, and deeply human, just like the young man who was still unknowingly preparing for a destiny far greater than he imagined. In the same period, his older brother Ananda Mahidol, who had been living with the family in Switzerland as well, was officially named King Rama VIII of Siam in 1935. Ananda was only 9 years old when he inherited the crown, following the abdication of their uncle, King Prajadipak Rama VII. However, given the king's young age and the family's continued residence in Europe, Ananda's kingship was symbolic at first, with a regency council managing the affairs of state in Thailand. The royal family's position in Switzerland during this transitional era of Thai history was complicated. While their homeland underwent dramatic political changes, military influence rising, democratic institutions taking root, and old aristocratic orders challenged, the young monarchs were growing up thousands of miles away in a calm European city. The family made brief visits to Thailand, such as a 2-month stay in 1938, but their lives remained primarily Swiss. As the Second World War drew to a close in 1945, the Mahidol family prepared to return permanently to Thailand. King Ananda, now a young man and no longer a child monarch, was eager to begin his reign in earnest. Bhumibol, who had just begun his university studies in science at the University of Lausanne, remained in Europe for a while longer, continuing his education and musical pursuits. But in June 1946, the royal household's world would be shattered by an event so shocking and mysterious that it would haunt Bhumibol for the rest of his life and mark the beginning of his extraordinary journey to the throne. On the morning of June 9, 1946, King Ananda Mahidol was found dead in his bedroom at the Grand Palace in Bangkok. The official explanation that he had accidentally shot himself was met with skepticism both at home and abroad. Investigations were launched, and 3 palace aides were eventually executed in 1955 after being convicted of regicide. But doubts and rumors lingered for decades, with some whispering of political intrigue, assassination, or even a tragic accident involving his younger brother. None of these theories were ever officially confirmed, and the case remains one of the most perplexing and controversial moments in Thai royal history. The death of his brother left the 18-year-old Bhumibol in a state of profound grief. He had lost a sibling, a role model, and a monarch. But there was no time for mourning. According to the laws of succession and the expectations of the Thai people, he was now King of Thailand, Ananda Mahidol. His life changed in an instant, from that of a quiet, music-loving university student to the embodiment of national unity, sovereignty, and tradition. Though Bhumibol officially ascended the throne in 1946, he returned to Switzerland shortly after to complete his studies and to allow Thailand time to prepare for a royal cremation ceremony for King Ananda. During this time, Bhumibol also changed his academic focus from science to law and political science, understanding that his future role would require not only moral clarity, but also a firm grasp of constitutional and political theory. His uncle, Prince Rangsit of China, was appointed regent in his absence, guiding the affairs of state until Bhumibol could return and formally assume his duties. The trauma of his brother's death and the immense responsibility that now lay before him had a deep and lasting impact on Bhumibol. Though he rarely spoke publicly about the incident, those close to him described a sudden transformation. The once youthful prince became more introspective, solemn, and focused. His demeanor hardened, his sense of duty sharpened. He understood that the monarchy was no longer a source of absolute power. It was now a symbol, one that had to earn legitimacy not through command, but through service, compassion, and moral authority. It was the beginning of a reign that would span 7 decades, encompass more than a dozen military coups, and witness the transformation of Thailand into a modern nation. Yet at this early moment, standing at the threshold of history, Bhumibol was still a young man recovering from personal tragedy, far from the image of the wise, revered monarch he would one day become. Part 3, Love, Duty, and the Burden of the Crown, 1946-1951. When Bhumibol Adulyadej became King of Thailand in June 1946, the country was still reeling from the sudden, mysterious death of his elder brother, King Ananda Mahidol. At just 18 years old, Bhumibol found himself thrust into the spotlight, bearing the responsibilities of a modern monarch while still trying to finish his education and process the enormity of his personal loss. Though officially king, Bhumibol continued living in Switzerland during the initial years of his reign, balancing his studies in law and political science with a growing awareness of the immense expectations awaiting him back home. From Lausanne, he kept a close watch on Thailand, communicating with his regent, Prince Rangsit of China, who served as the official intermediary between the throne and the government. It was a politically volatile time for the kingdom. Thailand had recently emerged from the Second World War in an uneasy position, having allied with Japan during the conflict, but later attempting to realign itself with the victorious Allied powers. The country was navigating the complexities of post-war diplomacy, economic recovery, and ideological divisions between monarchy, democracy, and the military. Amidst this backdrop, Bhumibol remained a quiet, distant figure in the minds of most Thais, an image that would soon begin to change. In December 1946, the Thai government allocated a considerable sum to fund the ceremonial cremation of King Ananda's remains, a prerequisite to Bhumibol's formal coronation. However, political instability, including a military coup in November 1947, led to multiple delays. Court astrologers eventually selected 2nd of March 1949 as the most auspicious date for Ananda's royal cremation. For Bhumibol, it was both a symbolic closing of a painful chapter and the ceremonial prelude to the full responsibilities of kingship. But even as he prepared to honor the traditions of his ancestors and accept the symbolic instruments of power, a near-fatal accident would again alter the course of his life. On 4 October 1948, while driving a Fiat Topolino along the Geneva-Lausanne road, Bhumibol collided with a braking truck. The crash was severe. He suffered deep facial lacerations, spinal injury, and partial paralysis. Most devastating of all, he permanently lost the sight in his right eye. The accident deeply shook the young monarch, physically and emotionally. But during his long recovery at the hospital in Lausanne, an unexpected love quietly blossomed. One of his frequent visitors was a poised and elegant 15-year-old girl named Mam Rajawangsi Sirikit Kidiakra, the daughter of the Thai ambassador to France and a distant cousin of the king through their shared descent from King Chulalongkorn. Trained in classical piano and educated in France, Sirikit possessed both grace and intellect, qualities that caught the attention of Bhumibol and his mother, Princess Srinagarindra. As Bhumibol recovered, the two grew close. The king, now focused more than ever on his future, asked Sirikit to study nearby so they could spend more time together. He personally selected Riante Rive, a prestigious boarding school in Lausanne, for her. Their bond deepened in private, far from the eyes of the court and the public. The quiet engagement that followed in July 1949 was an intimate and heartfelt commitment, one that reflected Bhumibol's desire for companionship, rooted not just in tradition, but in love. With the cremation of King Ananda complete and his relationship with Sirikit publicly acknowledged, Bhumibol prepared to return to Thailand. But before doing so, another important tradition awaited: the royal wedding. On 28th April 1950, just a week before his coronation, Bhumibol married Sirikit in a simple and touching ceremony at Surapathum Palace in Bangkok. It was presided over by his grandmother, Queen Savang Badhana. The New York Times described it as the shortest, simplest royal wedding ever held in the land of gilded elephants and white umbrellas. Yet its significance was profound. Sirikit was now Queen of Thailand, and Bhumibol, finally, was ready to embrace his role as sovereign. A week later, on 5th May 1950, Bhumibol Adulyadej was officially crowned in the Phai San Thaksin Throne Hall of Bangkok's Grand Palace. The ceremony, held under the formalities of Thailand's newly established constitutional monarchy, was a dazzling mix of tradition and modernity. Draped in royal regalia, seated beneath the great white umbrella of state, and surrounded by centuries-old symbols of divine kingship, the young king pledged to reign with righteousness for the benefit and happiness of the Siamese people. His words, spoken with clarity and conviction, marked the beginning of a reign that would redefine what it meant to be a monarch in the modern world. Despite the grandeur of the coronation and his rising public image, Bhumibol remained acutely aware of his unfinished responsibilities in Switzerland. He had not yet completed his degree, and so after a brief honeymoon with Queen Sirikit in the seaside town of Hua Hin, the royal couple returned to Lausanne. There they resumed their quiet life as students for another year, preparing for the roles that awaited them. This period, though brief, was pivotal in shaping the monarchy's future. It was during these years abroad that Bhumibol formulated the core principles that would define his kingship: a commitment to duty, a deep moral consciousness, and an unshakable belief that the monarchy's legitimacy must be earned through service. It was also during this time that the Thai royal couple formed a personal bond based on shared adversity, resilience, and a growing sense of purpose. When they returned permanently to Thailand in 1951, the landscape that awaited them was uncertain. The monarchy had been stripped of much of its formal power, and political life in the kingdom was often dominated by military strongmen. But Bhumibol had something far more enduring than legislation or military force. He had the affection of the people and a quiet resolve to make the throne not just a symbol of the past, but a living institution that could guide the country into the future. Part 4. Foundations of a Modern Monarch. Rebuilding the Monarchy and Embracing the Nation, year 1951-1963. By 1951, King Bhumibol Adulyadej and Queen Sirikit had returned to Thailand as a newlywed royal couple, ready to take on the full responsibilities of their role. The young monarch, just 23 years old, faced a kingdom emerging from the shadows of colonial tension, ideological uncertainty, and fragile constitutional democracy. The nation's political balance was dominated by the military, and the monarchy, stripped of its absolute power since 1932, was still finding its new identity. Yet even in these constrained circumstances, Bhumibol quietly and strategically began to shape the institution into a force of moral authority and national unity. Thailand in the 1950s was a country of contrasts. It was rapidly urbanizing in pockets like Bangkok, but much of the country remained rural, underdeveloped, and disconnected from political life. The monarchy, too, was largely symbolic at this time, with real power resting in the hands of military leaders like Field Marshal Plaek Phibun Songkhram. Initially, Bhumibol was a constitutional figurehead, seen more in ceremonial roles than political deliberations. Yet he began planting the seeds for a different kind of monarchy, one rooted in visibility, public service, and emotional connection with the people. One of his first acts to solidify his connection to Thai tradition was to enter a monkhood briefly in 1956, following the death of his grandmother, Queen Savangbhadhana. The custom of entering the monkhood, even briefly, is considered a rite of passage for most Thai men, and Bhumibol's participation in this ritual further cemented his connection to the spiritual and cultural values of his people. For 15 days, he lived modestly as a monk at Wat Bhawanawet, clad in saffron robes, humbling himself before the teachings of the Buddha. During this time, Queen Sirikit was appointed regent, an important moment that underscored her growing role in national affairs and royal diplomacy. The king's time as a monk, while brief, reinforced the public perception of him as a monarch deeply rooted in Thai tradition and spirituality. It was a quiet yet powerful act, endearing him further to his subjects and reinforcing the sacred aura around the throne. But beyond rituals and ceremonies, Bhumibol also began engaging directly with the people in ways his predecessors had never done. While the military governed from the capital, Bhumibol and Queen Sirikit set out on a series of ambitious royal tours, visiting rural provinces, hill tribes, and distant communities that had rarely seen a member of the royal family, let alone a reigning monarch. These visits were not merely symbolic, they were part of a deliberate effort to knit together a deeply fragmented country. The king would often arrive in a simple Land Rover or by boat, forgoing pomp for practicality. In muddy rice fields and dusty villages, he listened attentively to farmers, elders, and teachers. He asked about their harvests, their water supply, their health. He took notes, asked questions, and documented conditions with his ever-present camera. For many villagers, it was the first time they had ever felt seen or heard by someone in authority. These visits, often photographed and broadcast through state media, portrayed a monarch who cared about the lives of ordinary people, a stark contrast to the aloof, palace-bound image of monarchs past. It was also during this time that Bhumibol began his deep involvement in rural development and self-sufficiency projects, long before they became central to his reign. Observing the difficulties faced by Thailand's poorest citizens, droughts, lack of irrigation, poor sanitation, he began sketching ideas and conceptualizing solutions. He would later say that before a country can be strong, it must be able to feed itself. This belief would lay the groundwork for the philosophy he later coined as the sufficiency economy. Parallel to his growing visibility, Bhumibol's relationship with the military began to evolve. In 1957, dissatisfaction with the government of Field Marshal Phibun Songkhram reached a boiling point. Accusations of corruption, electoral manipulation, and even lèse-majesté became catalysts for change. General Sarit Thanarat led a bloodless coup against Phibun, claiming to restore morality and order to the kingdom. Bhumibol played a pivotal, if subtle, role in this transition. Though he maintained the formal appearance of neutrality, he accepted Sarit's authority as military defender of the capital and issued a royal proclamation acknowledging the change in leadership. Without requiring it to be countersigned, a notable deviation from protocol. While some observers interpreted this as royal endorsement of the coup, others saw it as Bhumibol's quiet strategy to reposition the monarchy within the power structure of modern Thailand. With Sarit in power, Bhumibol gained an ally who shared his vision of reviving the monarchy's public stature. The dictator reinstated many royal ceremonies long discarded after the 1932 revolution. Crawling in the royal presence, a tradition banned by King Chulalongkorn, was brought back in formal settings. The regal barge processions returned to the Chao Phraya River. And most importantly, Bhumibol's birthday, December 5th, was declared the new national day, replacing the anniversary of the 1932 revolution that had ended absolute monarchy. This renaissance of royal symbolism wasn't simply about nostalgia. It was a deliberate campaign to restore the monarchy's legitimacy and centrality in Thai society. The king, for his part, began using this restored image not to dominate, but to serve. He remained scrupulously apolitical in public, but cultivated an image of a king above politics, a symbol of unity, morality, and compassion in a country often rocked by division and coups. Internationally, Bhumibol also began to represent Thailand abroad. In 1960, he and Queen Sirikit embarked on an official state visit to the United States, the first ever by a reigning Thai monarch. Dressed in military uniform, Bhumibol addressed the United States Congress, highlighting the importance of Thailand's relationship with the West during the Cold War. The royal couple toured Europe as well, dazzling hosts in Rome, London, and Paris with their grace, poise, and quiet dignity. These visits not only elevated the monarchy's profile abroad, but also helped Thailand solidify its image as a stable, sovereign state amid regional turmoil. By the early 1960s, the foundations of Bhumibol's reign were firmly laid. He had re-established the monarchy as a central moral force, aligned it with both tradition and modern development, and endeared himself to the people through his humble and tireless service. While the military still held the reins of political power, it was increasingly clear that Bhumibol held something even more potent: the hearts of the people. His reign was no longer a question of political authority. It was becoming something deeper, more enduring, a reign of trust, reverence, and example. Part 5. The Development King, Nation Building Amidst Shadows, 1963-1976. By the early 1960s, King Bhumibol Adulyadej had transitioned from a youthful monarch learning the ropes of a changing kingdom into a revered symbol of unity and progress. Through royal tours, rural outreach, and international diplomacy, he had successfully restored the monarchy's stature and embedded it into the heart of Thai life. However, the decades that followed would test his resolve and redefine the role of the monarchy in turbulent political times. The death of General Sarit Thanarat in December 1963 marked a pivotal shift. Sarit had been a staunch supporter of the monarchy and had orchestrated a renaissance of royal prestige. His death was deeply mourned at the palace. The king declared an unprecedented 21 days of mourning, and Sarit's body was shaded by a 5-tiered royal umbrella, an honor rarely extended to non-royals. Their unique relationship had helped strengthen the monarchy's role in modern Thailand. With Sarit gone, Bhumibol had to navigate the nation's increasingly complex political terrain without a steadfast political ally. Despite the loss, the monarchy's transformation was far from over. If Sarit had helped revive royal ritual and ceremonial grandeur, Bhumibol himself would lay the foundations of a new philosophy, one that would redefine his reign: development through compassion. As political power remained largely in the hands of military regimes, Bhumibol turned toward the people, especially the marginalized, focusing on practical, sustainable ways to improve their lives. This was the dawn of the Development King era. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, King Bhumibol embarked on countless rural expeditions, sometimes visiting more than a dozen provinces in a single month. He traveled by boat, jeep, helicopter, or on foot, undeterred by difficult terrain or monsoon rains. His approach was simple yet revolutionary. Go to the people, observe, listen, understand, and then act. Often he would arrive at remote villages unannounced, camera in hand, notebook tucked under his arm. He would listen to farmers describe their irrigation problems or talk to villagers about their crop yields. Then with quiet concentration, he would begin to sketch, sometimes an improved water dam, sometimes a canal system or a crop rotation plan. These visits weren't mere photo opportunities. They were part of a deliberate, grassroots-style engagement that helped Bhumibol form a vision for rural development. He believed that meaningful change had to begin with understanding local conditions and applying scientific knowledge in an appropriate, culturally sensitive way. To support this vision, he initiated hundreds of projects, from small-scale water reservoirs to agricultural cooperatives, veterinary clinics, schools, and soil improvement stations. These efforts culminated in the foundation of the Royal Project in 1969, which tackled the opium problem in the Northern Highlands. Recognizing that hill tribes relied on poppy cultivation for their livelihood, the king proposed alternative crops such as coffee, fruit trees, and cabbages, introducing them with agricultural training and access to markets. Over time, the Royal Project would become a model for sustainable development, lauded internationally and credited with improving livelihoods and protecting forest land from deforestation and drug production. During this period, Bhumibol also began formulating what would later be known as the sufficiency economy philosophy, a middle-path economic model that emphasized moderation, self-reliance, and sustainability over unchecked growth. Though the term would not gain prominence until decades later, its roots were already taking form in the fieldwork and personal beliefs of the king during these crucial years. As his rural outreach deepened, Bhumibol's popularity among the Thai people soared. Photographs of him walking barefoot through muddy rice fields, crouching beside village elders, or playing jazz with students were circulated nationwide, creating an image of a monarch both wise and accessible. While politicians and generals came and went, Bhumibol remained a constant presence, a symbol of integrity, stability, and compassion. Yet all was not peaceful in the kingdom. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Thailand found itself increasingly entangled in the Cold War. Communist revolutions in neighboring Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia stirred fears of a domino effect, and Thailand, as a close ally of the United States, became a strategic military hub. American troops were stationed on Thai soil, and U.S. aid poured into the country, furthering modernization, but also sowing social unrest and political inequality. It was during this tense period that General Thanom Kittikachorn, Sarat's successor, led a military government that grew increasingly authoritarian. In October 1973, a student-led protest in Bangkok calling for constitutional reform turned violent when government forces opened fire on demonstrators, killing dozens and injuring hundreds more. Thailand teetered on the brink of civil conflict. In a historic moment that remains seared in the memory of the Thai people, King Bhumibol intervened. He summoned both the military leaders and the protest representatives to the Chitralada royal villa, asking them to resolve the crisis peacefully. When it became clear that the government had lost public support, he asked the Nome to step down and leave the country. The king's action was seen not as an assertion of political power, but as a moral necessity to prevent further bloodshed. The image of the king as a compassionate mediator and peacemaker was further solidified. For many, it was the most direct and powerful example of the king using his moral authority to shape national events for the greater good. The monarchy's position, once ceremonial and distanced from politics, was now seen as an essential safeguard during national crises. However, peace was short-lived. Political instability persisted. In the following years, a resurgence of military influence, fears of communist infiltration, and increased right-wing nationalism culminated in one of Thailand's darkest hours, the Thammasat University massacre of 1976. Students who had helped overthrow Thanom's dictatorship 3 years earlier were now protesting his unexpected return to Thailand. On the 6th of October 1976, state forces and right-wing paramilitaries stormed the Thammasat campus. Dozens of students were killed, many brutally tortured and lynched. The shocking violence was justified by some in the name of protecting the monarchy from communist subversion. The king remained silent during the initial aftermath, a silence that drew both sorrow and criticism from liberal intellectuals and rights activists. But behind the scenes, Bhumibol was deeply troubled. That same day, the military seized power in a coup. To restore calm, the king was asked to appoint a new prime minister. He selected Thanin Krivichin, a right-wing Supreme Court judge known for his staunch anti-communist views. Thanin's government would later be overthrown in another coup just a year later, but the episode marked a difficult chapter in the king's reign, one that highlighted the complexities of monarchy, political neutrality, and moral authority in a deeply polarized country. Despite the turmoil, Bhumibol's popularity among the general public endured. For many, he remained the steady lighthouse in a stormy sea, a king who traveled among his people, worked for their welfare, and embodied their aspirations. But it was also becoming clear that the monarch's role in Thai society was not just symbolic. It was deeply political, even if unofficially so. As the 1970s drew to a close, Thailand had undergone tremendous change. Rapid urbanization, mass protests, bloody confrontations, and rising ideological tensions. And through it all, Bhumibol stood as the soul of the nation, often silent, sometimes speaking, but always watching, always thinking, always serving. Part 6, Pillar of Stability, Mediator, Monarch, and Moral Guardian, 1977-1992. As Thailand moved into the 1980s, King Bhumibol Adulyadej stood at the crossroads of tradition and modernity. The violent convulsions of the 1970s had shaken the nation's soul, and while the monarchy emerged intact, it had not escaped unscathed. The Thammasat University massacre had left emotional scars across the country, and although many still revered the king, critics, especially among students, activists, and intellectuals, began to question the monarchy's growing entanglement with political and military forces. Yet in these uncertain years, Bhumibol would redefine his role once again, not as a political actor, but as a moral compass whose influence extended far beyond the confines of law or constitution. The image of a monarch committed to peace, compassion, and national reconciliation became central to Thai identity. In 1980, a new figure emerged on the political scene who would prove instrumental in stabilizing the country. General Prem Tinsulanonda, the former commander-in-chief of the Royal Thai Army. Bhumibol supported Prem's appointment as prime minister, seeing in him a man of integrity, moderation, and loyalty to the constitutional monarchy. Prem, who would later serve as president of the Privy Council, governed Thailand for 8 years, overseeing a period of political calm, gradual democratization, and economic growth. The partnership between Bhumibol and Prem was unique. Though Prem held formal authority, his deference to the king was evident in both tone and policy. For his part, Bhumibol refrained from direct political engagement, but his presence loomed large as a moral force behind the scenes. The king endorsed policies that aligned with his development philosophy, particularly in rural infrastructure, education, and environmental conservation. The palace's outreach programs expanded, and the concept of royally initiated projects gained deeper traction across Thailand. As Prem governed from the capital, Bhumibol and Queen Sirikit continued their relentless provincial tours, visiting far-flung villages and borderlands. By now, these visits had evolved into large-scale logistical operations, supported by experts, scientists, engineers, and security teams. But at their heart remained the same simple ethos: listen, learn, act. Throughout this time, Bhumibol remained laser-focused on rural upliftment. In provinces ravaged by drought or malaria, he initiated reforestation campaigns and mobile medical clinics. In areas of ethnic tension, he brought messages of unity, often framed in gentle but pointed Buddhist parables. He believed that peace could only be sustained by addressing inequality, and the crown's development efforts reflected this view. Bhumibol also delved deeper into technical innovation. He earned patents for devices like the Chai Patana aerator, designed to purify wastewater in rural ponds and canals. These inventions weren't mere gestures. They were tested and implemented by engineers across Thailand. The king's technical notebooks were filled with sketches, equations, and proposals, testament to a monarch who took practical problem-solving as seriously as ceremonial duties. However, the monarchy's close association with military figures remained a source of tension. In 1981, a failed coup by military officers loyal to another faction challenged Prem's authority. The rebels briefly seized Bangkok, only to be thwarted after Bhumibol refused to endorse their actions. In a dramatic move, the king flew to Nakhon Ratchasima, where loyalist forces were assembling, signaling his allegiance to the constitutional government. The rebellion quickly collapsed, and the king's refusal to support the coup was seen as pivotal. The same pattern repeated in 1985 when another coup attempt failed, again in part due to the absence of royal approval. These events cemented Bhumibol's role as the final arbiter of legitimacy in Thai politics. While never formally intervening in daily governance, his moral authority was absolute. The message was clear. Thailand's path forward lay not through violence or usurpation, but through stability, unity, and lawful order. In 1987, Bhumibol celebrated the 60th anniversary of his birth, a milestone marked with reverence and grand public celebrations across the kingdom. The government declared it the Year of the King, and tributes poured in from across the globe. International leaders praised him as a humanitarian monarch who had uplifted millions. Domestically, his birthday was increasingly seen not just as a holiday, but as a symbol of national identity. Portraits of the king adorned homes, schools, temples, and businesses, his image becoming as ubiquitous as the flag itself. The late 1980s also marked a profound moment in world history, the end of the Cold War. For Thailand, it meant the waning of external ideological threats and the emergence of new domestic challenges. As U.S. military influence diminished and as the Thai economy entered a period of rapid expansion, Bhumibol turned his attention to fostering ethical governance in a society increasingly marked by materialism and inequality. But the king's moral guidance was soon needed once again, this time in a crisis that threatened to plunge the nation into civil conflict. In 1991, another military coup overthrew Thailand's elected government, citing corruption and instability. A year later, the new regime appointed General Suchinda Khreprayun, one of the coup leaders, as prime minister, a move that enraged the public and was seen as a betrayal of democratic principles. Protests erupted across Bangkok, led by pro-democracy activists and opposition parties. In May 1992, violence reached a climax. Security forces fired into crowds, killing and injuring hundreds in what came to be known as Black May. As chaos gripped the capital, Thailand held its breath. Then, in a powerful and unprecedented moment broadcast live on national television, King Bhumibol summoned General Suchinda and protest leader Shamlong Srimwang to his palace. Kneeling before him in traditional royal protocol, the two men bowed their heads as Bhumibol, seated calmly between them, implored both sides to find peace for the sake of the nation. He spoke not as a ruler demanding obedience, but as a father urging his children to end their quarrel. The image of two powerful men kneeling before the king in humility and submission sent a message more potent than any law. The moral authority of the throne stood above political division. Soon after, Suchinda resigned, and a path toward democratic restoration was cleared. The moment became iconic, proof of the monarchy's ability to de-escalate crisis not through force, but through revered presence. By 1992, Bhumibol Adulyadej had been king for 46 years. He had guided Thailand through the Cold War, multiple coups, economic shifts, and ideological storms. Through it all, he had evolved the institution of monarchy into something uniquely Thai, an office no longer reliant on political power, but on a deeper wellspring of cultural legitimacy, personal sacrifice, and trust. He had become more than just a sovereign. He was a living embodiment of the nation's conscience, a monarch not above his people, but among them. Part 7. The Watchful Monarch. Triumph, Crisis, and the Fragility of Democracy, the 1993-2006. In the wake of the 1992 Black May crisis, King Bhumibol Adulyadej stood tall in the eyes of his nation. The image of two political rivals kneeling before him in his palace, seeking guidance and absolution, had left an indelible mark on the national psyche. Bhumibol had demonstrated that he was not simply a ceremonial figure, nor a political actor, but something far more powerful, a revered and trusted arbiter, above partisanship, whose mere presence could calm chaos and reset the course of a divided nation. With peace momentarily restored, Thailand entered the mid-1990s on a wave of optimism. Economic reforms and foreign investments, particularly in manufacturing and real estate, triggered what many described as the Thai economic miracle. Between 1985 and 1994, the kingdom recorded some of the fastest growth rates in the world, earning its place among the rising Asian tiger economies. Glass skyscrapers reshaped the Bangkok skyline, global brands filled luxury malls, and a new urban middle class emerged with aspirations, consumption power, and political voice. But amid the glitter of progress, King Bhumibol remained cautious. He often spoke of the dangers of unbalanced growth, unsustainable consumerism, and the moral decay that could accompany material excess. His royal addresses subtly warned of hubris. In contrast to the gleaming business towers of the capital, the king continued to focus on rural communities, introducing and refining the philosophy that would become the cornerstone of his legacy, the sufficiency economy. The sufficiency economy, rooted in Buddhist moderation, emphasized sustainability, resilience, and self-reliance. Bhumibol proposed that Thailand's development should proceed from the grassroots, not from the top down. He believed that prosperity without moral grounding and economic balance would ultimately collapse. His theory, once seen as quaint or overly conservative by economists, soon gained renewed relevance. In 1997, the Thai economy, along with those of its neighbors, imploded in the Asian financial crisis. A sudden collapse of the baht currency, triggered by over-speculation in an unsustainable bubble of foreign debt, led to bankruptcies, job losses, and an IMF bailout. Many middle-class Thais lost their savings overnight, and businesses closed by the tens of thousands. The euphoria of the Asian tiger era turned into national soul-searching. Through it all, the monarchy remained a pillar of emotional strength. The king's message of "enough is as good as a feast," a warning against unchecked ambition, resonated with new urgency. Bhumibol did not publicly blame any one actor, but continued to emphasize the need for ethical governance, community-level economics, and personal responsibility. The crisis exposed the fragility of Thailand's institutions and reignited political tension. In 2001, Thaksin Shinawatra, a charismatic telecom tycoon, rose to power on a populist platform. His policies aimed at reducing poverty, expanding healthcare access, and stimulating rural economies struck a chord with the poor and disenfranchised. His massive electoral victories signaled a shift. Political power was now flowing from the grassroots rather than traditional elite centers. But with his rise came fierce opposition. Critics accused Thaksin of authoritarian tendencies, media suppression, and corruption. More alarmingly for royalists and the old establishment, Thaksin's growing influence seemed to challenge the moral authority of the monarchy itself. Rumors swirled of a shadow power struggle between the elected government and what some called the network monarchy, a term coined by scholars to describe the vast network of royalist bureaucrats, military officers, judges, and advisors loyal to the king. Throughout the early 2000s, Bhumibol remained publicly neutral, as was his constitutional role. But he gave subtle indications of concern. In a 2005 speech on his birthday, a moment traditionally used to reflect on national values, he made a startling remark. "Actually, I must also be criticized. I am not afraid if the criticism concerns what I do wrong. If you say the king cannot be criticized, it means that the king is not human. This speech was widely interpreted as an invitation for more open dialogue, even about the monarchy itself. Yet paradoxically, the years that followed saw a steep increase in lèse-majesté prosecutions, cases in which individuals were jailed or exiled for allegedly insulting the king or royal family. Critics argued that the laws were increasingly used to silence political dissent, rather than to genuinely protect the monarchy. In 2006, the conflict between Thaksin and the royalist establishment reached a tipping point. Amid mass protests organized by the People's Alliance for Democracy, PAD, also known as the Yellow Shirts, Thaksin dissolved parliament and called for new elections. The opposition boycotted the vote, and a constitutional crisis loomed. In an extraordinary moment, the king addressed a room full of senior judges in a televised broadcast and urged them to resolve the matter. "You must take responsibility," he said. "You cannot be silent. The country is in turmoil." The judges acted, annulling the election and calling for a new one. But the crisis did not end there. On 19th of September 2006, while the king was recovering from spinal surgery, the Thai military staged a bloodless coup. Tanks rolled through Bangkok, and the constitution was torn up. The coup leaders, members of the Royal Thai Army, declared their loyalty to King Bhumibol and framed their actions as a defense of the monarchy and the nation. The king made no public comment endorsing or condemning the coup, but within days he formally appointed General Suryud Chulanon, a member of his Privy Council, as interim prime minister. For many observers, the royal imprimatur gave the new regime legitimacy, but others, including foreign journalists and democracy advocates, raised troubling questions about the monarchy's proximity to anti-democratic forces. Thaksin, ousted and in exile, accused the palace and its network of orchestrating his downfall. His supporters, many of whom were poor rural Thais who had benefited from his policies, began to see the monarchy less as a neutral institution and more as a player in the political game. It was a dangerous shift. For decades, the throne had stood above the fray, enjoying nearly universal reverence. Now, for the first time in Bhumibol's reign, cracks began to appear in the consensus. Yet even in this moment of crisis, Bhumibol's personal popularity remained intact among most Thais. In a nation increasingly fractured by wealth, ideology, and regionalism, he was still seen by millions as the father of the country, a monarch who had never abandoned his people in flood, drought, or despair. The twilight of his reign was approaching, and the challenges were growing. The country he had guided for over half a century was changing in ways no one could fully control. And yet, the king remained, still walking, still watching, still silently shaping the soul of a nation. Part 8. Twilight of the King. Decline, Division, and Devotion. 2006-2016. By the beginning of the 21st century's second decade, King Bhumibol Adulyadej had reigned for over 60 years. He had become not only the longest-serving monarch in Thai history, but also the longest-reigning sovereign in Asia and one of the most venerated kings in the world. Yet while his symbolic presence remained unshakable, his physical strength began to wane. The king, now in his late 70s and early 80s, faced recurring health issues that would increasingly confine him to hospitals and royal residences. In October 2007, Bhumibol was admitted to Siriraj Hospital in Bangkok. Though officially treated for a shortage of blood to the brain, the episodes became more frequent, sparking nationwide concern. Later revelations would indicate that the king also suffered from Parkinson's disease, depression, and other complications that would gradually reduce his public appearances. In a society where his presence had been constant for decades, on television, at ceremonies, in rural villages, his absence was deeply felt. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, Thailand was descending into renewed political turmoil. Following the 2006 coup, the military-installed government rewrote the constitution and banned Thaksin Shinawatra's Thai Rak Thai Party. Yet Thaksin's political base remained strong. In 2007, his allies regrouped under a new banner, the People's Power Party, and won the general election. The cycle began again. Soon, Bangkok saw massive street protests from both sides. The yellow-clad People's Alliance for Democracy, PAD, often seen as royalist and anti-Thaksin, and later the red-shirted United Front for Democracy Against Dictatorship, the UDD, composed mostly of rural Thaksin supporters. The once unifying image of the king began to suffer, not because of personal fault, but due to the intensifying polarization that pulled the monarchy into political narratives. Supporters of the yellow shirts often invoked loyalty to the monarchy as part of their cause, wrapping themselves in royal colors and imagery. Red shirts, by contrast, increasingly accused the old elite, composed of generals, bureaucrats, and royal advisors, of using the crown as a tool to suppress democratic will. Throughout this turbulence, Bhumibol maintained his silence, appearing in public less frequently. But when he did, his presence still held incredible emotional force. On the 5th of December 2007, his 80th birthday, the ailing king appeared in a wheelchair before a crowd of tens of thousands who had gathered to offer blessings. The mood was reverent, reflective, and emotional. Even amid growing divisions, most Thais still regarded him as their guiding light, the father of the nation, the Phra Chao Yuhua, the Lord upon our heads. In 2009 and 2010, the red shirt protests intensified, culminating in violent confrontations in Bangkok. Dozens were killed in the streets. The military was once again called in to suppress the uprising. Many expected the king to speak, to guide, to calm the storm as he had done in 1992. But this time, he remained silent. Some said he was too ill. Others believed he feared that any statement might worsen the divide or compromise the monarchy's image of neutrality. That silence became emblematic of the fragility of the system he had helped hold together for decades. His moral presence, so powerful for so long, could no longer stop the centrifugal forces tearing at the fabric of Thai society. Still, he never publicly abandoned his duties. He continued to meet with judges, military commanders, and advisors. He continued to sign decrees and perform his ceremonial obligations as much as his health allowed. In 2014, the country once again succumbed to a military coup, the 12th since the end of the absolute monarchy in 1932. This time, it was led by General Prayut Chan-o-cha, who cited political instability and threats to national security. On May 26, Bhumibol formally endorsed Prayut as head of the new military government. While the endorsement was in line with constitutional procedures, it added to growing criticism that the monarchy was once again complicit in undermining democratic institutions. Yet among millions of Thais, particularly in the rural heartlands, such criticism held little sway. To them, King Bhumibol remained a benevolent monarch, a symbol of selflessness who had dedicated his entire life to their welfare. They remembered his visits to their villages, his concern for their rice harvests, his inventions to irrigate their lands. In temples across the country, images of the king shared space with Buddha statues. In their homes, his portraits hung beside those of their ancestors. In 2015, the king's birthday celebration was noticeably subdued. For the first time in living memory, he did not appear in public. A brief televised image of him in a hospital wheelchair, frail, quiet, but composed, was enough to bring tears to many. It was a reminder that an era was coming to an end. By mid-2016, the king's health had sharply declined. He suffered from renal failure and severe hypertension, and was dependent on hemodialysis. He was admitted to Siraj Hospital once more, surrounded by a team of the country's top doctors. The nation waited anxiously, praying in temples, lighting candles, wearing black ribbons. For Thais, the idea of life without King Bhumibol was almost inconceivable. He had reigned for so long that generations had known no other monarch. On 13 October 2016 at 3:52 p.m., the Royal Household Bureau issued the statement that brought the nation to a standstill. King Bhumibol Adulyadej, Ramananmine of the Chakri dynasty, had passed away peacefully at the age of 88. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Millions wept openly in the streets. Crowds gathered outside Siraj Hospital in mourning. Temples rang their bells. Government officials and citizens alike donned black in a gesture of national grief. Thailand entered a year-long mourning period. Television broadcasts went monochrome. Entertainment events were canceled. The streets of Bangkok filled with tributes, giant images of the king draped in white and black ribbons, surrounded by flowers and messages of farewell. On 14th of October, his body was transported in a solemn royal procession to the Grand Palace. Thousands lined the streets in silence, many kneeling, some weeping uncontrollably, whispering prayers as his cortege passed. The heir apparent, Crown Prince Maha Vajiralongkorn, performed the bathing ritual in the Phiman Rataya throne hall, formally initiating the transition of power. It was the end of an epoch, one defined not merely by the passage of time, but by the presence of a man who had become synonymous with the soul of a nation. King Bhumibol Adulyadej had weathered war, coups, protests, economic collapse, and a revolution in Thai society. And though he had long relinquished any political power, his moral authority had shaped modern Thailand more profoundly than any general or prime minister. In his death, the people did not merely mourn a sovereign. They grieved the passing of a father, a protector, a symbol of stability in a century of upheaval. But the final chapter of this royal journey, his cremation, legacy, and succession, was yet to unfold. Part 9, The Eternal Flame, Cremation, Succession, and Legacy of a Nation's Soul, 2016, 2019, and beyond. The death of King Bhumibol Adulyadej in October 2016 left Thailand in a state of mourning unlike anything it had experienced in modern history. For most citizens, he had been the only monarch they had ever known, a presence so constant and comforting that his absence felt like the loss of the nation's very heartbeat. Though the royal institution would continue, the man who had so deeply shaped its meaning had departed. As per tradition, the king's body lay in state in the Dusit Maha Prasat throne hall within the Grand Palace. Hundreds of thousands of mourners, clad in black, came from across the country to pay their final respects. Some stood in line for days, braving scorching heat and torrential rain, clutching portraits of their beloved king or holding lotus flowers and candles. Many cried silently. Others knelt and prostrated themselves as they approached the gilded urn. The atmosphere inside the palace was one of reverent stillness, a deep collective grief made tangible. It would be over a year before his royal cremation took place, a reflection of both the scale of the ceremony and the gravity of the king's significance. On 25th of October 2017, the royal cremation began at Sanam Luang, the ceremonial field adjacent to the Grand Palace. The entire nation watched as the symbolic Mount Meru, the celestial center of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, was recreated in stunning detail to honor a man regarded by many as semi-divine. The royal crematorium was a work of spiritual art, built by the finest craftsmen in the kingdom, adorned with golden spires, mythical creatures, and sculptures depicting the king's life and legacy. The 5-day funeral rites were filled with ancient traditions, sacred chants, royal processions, and the rhythmic beating of drums. On the night of 26th of October, the actual cremation took place, private, unseen by cameras, yet felt deeply across the country. Fire, the ancient purifier, returned the earthly remains of Ramanuja to the heavens. Even as flames consumed the body, millions lit candles in towns and villages across Thailand, creating a sea of flickering light that symbolized the enduring connection between the monarch and his people. The following day, his ashes and relics were divided and enshrined. His remains were placed in the Chakri Mahaprasat throne hall at the Grand Palace, the Royal Cemetery at Wat Ratchabophet, and Wat Bawaniwet Vihara, where he had once lived as a monk. By $30 October 2017, the official mourning period concluded, and the nation, though still grieving, began to look toward the future. That future arrived with the ascension of his son, Crown Prince Maha Vajiralongkorn, who became King Rama X. Though he had been named heir apparent in 1972, his delayed ascension, he requested time to mourn his father before accepting the crown, marked a rare moment in royal protocol. When he was formally crowned in May 2019, it was under a very different political climate, and comparisons with his father were inevitable. King Bhumibol's legacy, however, did not fade with the changing of reigns. It was everywhere. In the canals he helped irrigate, in the royal projects that had uplifted remote communities, in the hearts of farmers who revered him as Fra Boromchanok, the great king. His sufficiency economy. Philosophy, once seen as a gentle call for modesty, became national policy and was enshrined in the 2017 Constitution as a guiding principle for governance. His portrait, often depicted in royal uniform or clad in a simple shirt and camera around his neck, continued to hang in government offices, temples, schools, and homes. The anniversary of his birthday, 4th December, remained a national holiday, officially honored as Father's Day in Thailand, a reflection of his place as a paternal figure to the nation. Internationally, King Bhumibol was remembered with deep respect. In 2006, just before his 60th anniversary on the throne, UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan awarded him the first United Nations Development Programme's Human Development Lifetime Achievement Award, in recognition of his work on poverty reduction, sustainability, and rural development. He had composed music performed by world-class jazz musicians, invented devices to combat drought and pollution, and shown an unwavering commitment to the well-being of his people for over 7 decades. But perhaps the greatest testament to his legacy lies in the way he redefined kingship. At a time when monarchies around the world struggled to remain relevant, Bhumibol transformed the Thai monarchy from a remnant of an absolute past into a vital force of spiritual and moral guidance. He was not merely a sovereign, but a servant leader who walked barefoot among his people, who exchanged palatial comfort for muddy rice fields and mountain villages, and who believed that leadership was not about ruling from above, but serving from within. Critics have pointed to the challenges his reign left behind: the use of lèse-majesté laws, the monarchy's opaque financial operations, and the controversial role of the network monarchy in political affairs. These are legitimate questions for future historians and scholars, but even his critics could rarely question the sincerity of his commitment to Thailand's stability and people. King Bhumibol Adulyadej died as a mortal man, but in the eyes of millions he had become more than that: a moral compass, a symbol of continuity, and a soul that had watched over a nation in peace and in storm. As the smoke from his cremation rose into the night sky over Sanam Luang, many Thais looked upward, not just in mourning, but in gratitude. They did not simply bid farewell to a king. They saluted a life of profound service, a legacy etched into the soil and soul of their nation, and a memory that, like his compositions, would play on in the heart of Thailand forever.